I think a lot of people are underestimating the potential upside and the amount of time that Bitcoin has in store for upside on the weekly chart, as well as the same thing for ADA, the amount of upside for ADA. If people aren't realizing it, I don't know if it's because they're just not realizing it or potentially they are just so cautious to even try and get their hopes up. I think that could be potentially what's going on right now. But I want to talk about these weekly zoomed out charts and what is in store for this bull cycle. But I do also want to discuss the short term. I often talk about how, for me, I'm just a macro person. I'm a macro investor. I'm a macro bull, especially this cycle. But on the short term, anticipating just those big throwbacks, those dips that happen right now on the shorter term. Here's a daily chart for Bitcoin as well as ADA. We have dip potential in play. It's always good to anticipate these things. And I just want to discuss some targets. So hit the subscribe and like on the way in, and let's just jump into the video. I want to start on the zoomed out. I want to talk about these bullish cases and just show you some very simple pieces of data that are playing out on the Bitcoin and ADA charts. Let's start on Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, what I wanted to point out, obviously, if you've been watching my channel or maybe some other people tracking the inverse head and shoulders, multi-year setup, the throwback to the neckline, the bounce so far to the upside, we've been tracking that. The upside range for, target potential, depending how you're measuring this, is $130,000 to $300,000. But that could be a range for this bull market, anywhere in there. What I want to show you, though, is the weekly chart, the weekly momentum oscillators. Look at the MACD histogram just turning green. Incredible indicator as in terms of the momentum flip that's just recently happened. But what I really want to point out to you is kind of like a potential timeline perspective of how long Bitcoin could run. And we get a really nice illustration of that on the weekly RSI, the slower moving momentum oscillator. So we've been tracking how Bitcoin has kind of broken this trend line where we've seen this happen many times before. But what I really wanted to just point out to you was we kind of just capitulated to a record-breaking fear event right here on the weekly RSI. And then we're starting to trend up. What I want to do is I just want to go back and just look at another moment where we're getting a very similar move at the very similar area, right around 44 on the RSI. And what this move to the upside led to was also that MACD line starting to turn green. And if we just go look at that moment on the Bitcoin charts right around here, just look at what was happening. Let me open up the price chart and we can kind of get a sense of what was happening. So there's that MACD turning green. There is the RSI bouncing from that 44 area. And this is the move that Bitcoin had in store with those momentum oscillators kind of resetting where they were. Now, what I want to really say as we're talking about this is you might be like, well, hey, Dan, that was Bitcoin just exiting the bear market, different part of the cycle, pre-Bitcoin halving. I agree with all of that. But what I really want to mention is the macroeconomic landscape. The Bitcoin ETF now here, the global race for governments to accumulate Bitcoin, the Fed monetary pivot, the end of quantitative tightening. Like this is now the era that we're entering with Bitcoin resetting at these types of levels. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I really do think a lot of people are underestimating the power of a Bitcoin move. We can take a fractal, and I'm not saying this is what it's going to look like at all, okay? But we could take a fractal and we can just put it here and just say, hey, we could have a bull run into 2026. It could look something like this. Taking fractals is never a good way just to absolutely just, I guess, plan around. This is a good idea as a visual exercise to say this is one scenario that could play out especially when we're starting to compare the momentum upside of Bitcoin. But you get a sense of that right there on this chart. So I want to put that out there because yes, on the short term, we might get throwbacks, we might get dips, we might get higher lows across the board. We've already seen this cycle, the consolidation in a bull market that Bitcoin is doing is something like we've never seen in previous cycles. Post Bitcoin halving, it's just basically been like parabolic move, bear market. You know what I'm saying? Parabolic move, bear market. Right now, this is not the case. So something I think special is happening on these charts. So I don't think we should underestimate the upside for Bitcoin. Going over to the Bitcoin daily chart, let's talk about some downside. I saw Kevin Svensson, a good Bitcoin analyst over here, just kind of showing this 4-hour chart, which I'm not typically zoomed that far in, but this is very helpful actually on the zoomed out. I'm going to tell you why in a moment. But he's saying 4-hour chart, printing potential diamond top with measured move to 97.3. One last test before 100K, before new all-time highs, or below 100K before new all-time highs. He's questioning that. And it's a great kind of target. And let me explain why. That $97,000 area, check out what's there. Right here, the 20-day moving average, right around $98,000. Why is that meaningful? Well, last time in that 8-month consolidation back here that Bitcoin went into, we have a swing high to swing low, and then Bitcoin's breaking that lower high resistance channel at the Fibonacci. Just look at what it was doing during that story playing out, right? Breaking through the Fibonacci, right back to the 20-day, breaking away from the Fibonacci, back to the 20-day, actually slightly below the 20-day before continuation. Now, if that's going to happen again, break through this Fibonacci, throw back to the 20-day. That's right around 98,000 at the moment. And maybe we dip even further down. We hit this target that Kevin's talking about. So long story short, the dip for Bitcoin is obviously so in play. Higher low dips in bull markets are, I'd never want to use the word, we should absolutely just expect them, but they're so normal. So anticipating them at all times, especially when getting any amount of overextension from the moving average, it's just a good idea. So that's something that I'm watching right now as we're kind of just above this Fibonacci. Would be great to see continued support just sideways, and then actually just a move to the upside would be phenomenal to go towards all-time highs. But let's not underestimate a potential for short-term pullbacks. And this 20-day moving average is kind of that first area, and that's around 98,000. But also just make a note of the 200s down there at 92, the 50s down there at 90, and we just want to generally see these moving averages kind of trend upwards. And so who knows where Bitcoin might consolidate to if it's going to, but a move and a dip would be normal. And that's very best illustrated back here when Bitcoin was doing the same thing, right? Just absolutely dipping and then boom, all of a sudden. That's a move that could be in play right now. Let's go over and look at ADA. ADA on the weekly, let's look at the bullish aspect, and then we'll talk about the downside for Cardano if we are going to get markets kind of consolidating and taking a break right now. So many of you know that I've been talking about Cardano in this context to last cycle and just the entire reversal of Cardano. The structure on these charts, you can't ignore it. It's just there. And it's very useful to continue just going back to this because of the similarities there. Because we get a sense of, man, is Cardano going to do this, or is it actually going to diverge away from this? And so far, it's very much on track as far as the structure goes. So we've been talking about that. But with that in mind, I wanted to just point this out. I have these numbers here, 1, 2, 1, 2, because this is going to give us a really good idea of, I guess, the test. And the test that is in store for Cardano bulls, but also a confirmation area that if the bulls start winning, we can get a good sense of it. So here's what I'm looking at. 1 is 20-week moving average crossing above that blue line, the 50-week. There's 1, and then it failed, right? 2 is the second time it happened. So there's that move, and then it's ADA bulls struggling below the 20-week moving average before really the bull market started, and then we flipped it to support right here. So with that being said, here's 1, that first 20-week moving average crossing above the 50, failure, right? And then here's 2, 20-week moving average above the 50, and so far we are kind of like right here. We are testing and kind of interacting with the 20-week in a similar sense that we did back here in the fall of 2020. So if we look at this chart, you can see ADA, we want to see ADA above. And so far, it actually is above, but we might fall back below. And so that's the question. How is ADA and how are ADA bulls going to contend with the 20-week moving average on this chart? Because we saw what happened last week or last cycle. It was basically, it looks like months, right? These are weekly candles, but months of consolidation and rejection below the 20-week. Will we get something similar playing out this time? Because we have this 20-week above the 50, and now we're just waiting to see if we can start getting separation or even support above the 20-week moving average. So even though right now the weekly candle is not looking very nice on ADA, it's still worthwhile to watch. There's 4 days, 6 hours left of the weekly candle. Maybe the bulls step in all of a sudden, this week sometime before the candle closes and we're actually like trending up and starting to get some separation. And if that's the case, we go back here and then this is what we're looking for. Separation above the 20-week and continued support above the 20-week, ultimately leading to a bull market breakout. And if we start zooming out, you can kind of get the similarities and the sense of what we're looking for, right? And it's very simply, it's one of these, trending towards this upper trend line and break out. So I don't know how this will play out. ADA might just start stalling and having to test the 50-week. That's in the lower 60s. This could just be, we know what crypto does to us. It really tests us, right, in this regard. So if it all fails here and we're stalling, don't be surprised. But let's watch this. It's a great area to watch for. In the short term, ADA, if Bitcoin's dipping, ADA's dipping, everything's dipping, ADA as well could be dipping. And here's where we have some nice context with Bitcoin. We were just looking at Bitcoin. I think I mentioned this in last night's video briefly. We're looking at these Fibonacci retracements. Bitcoin kind of maybe consolidating right here in a similar way that it did back here towards the October, third week of October, end of October, right there. What I want to point out to you, I did last night on the daily chart for ADA, is that Fibonacci break that Bitcoin was kind of breaking away from in the end of October, ADA hadn't broken out yet. This is ADA towards the end of October right here, and just still consolidating. And even going into the beginning of November, just red candles looking terrible, looking like it's going to fall off a cliff, and then boom, explosion. Right? So as Bitcoin is testing its Fibonacci, maybe ADA needs to put in a higher low at these moving averages, the 50, the 20s right there, confluent. But 73 cents down to around 69 cents is 100% in play. If we take our Fibonacci, just to give you an idea of what that box is, it's swing low to swing high, higher low, and let me actually rechart this because that's not too helpful. But higher low area, you can see it pretty confluent with the 20 and the 50 day. So that's what to look out for ADA on the short term if there's going to be some volatility. But all the while, everybody, I'm a macro bull this cycle. Let's see how this plays out. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe, turn notifications on. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like. I'll see you in the next video. God bless.